Hello and welcome to everyone who is here today joining us in the room and also online. My name is Guy Dozer and I'm joined here today by Books I Can Share, who is the Global Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion for IKEA Retail. Books, welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. So, Books and I were talking before this session started, and we obviously had to discuss the fact that in this entire forum, this is the only time that there are only men at the front of the room. And we agreed that we might turn into a meme. However, we still thought that the conversation was very important and we were going to have it. And if anything, I think that shows us just what a fantastic job the European Institute for Gender Equality has done. So I'm going to start off by asking Books this question. Why is gender equality important to IKEA, and also why is it important to you personally?
No, thank you very much, Guy, and it really is a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this, and when it comes to gender equality, I think maybe I start with why it's important for us at IKEA. And regarding gender equality, it always comes from our values, because we are a values-led and we are a vision-driven company. And everything that we do is really about how do we create a better everyday life for the many people. That, for us, is our starting point. And when it comes to creating a better everyday life for the many people, it's really about how do we think about the needs of different people at different life stages across different identity aspects. And so for us, that is our starting point when it comes to our focus on gender equality. So it's very purpose-driven. And then the second reason is because we want to reflect the diversity of society, both when it comes to our coworker base, but also when it comes to our customer base. And we know that to be able to reflect the diversity of society, it means that we need to remove barriers that actually stand in people's way and create the best inclusive experiences that we actually can.
And how do you do that if the barriers are both external beyond the company's remit, but also, I mean, internal it makes sense, but does the company do things to try and tackle that both externally?
Yes, absolutely. And when it comes to the barriers, I think we have done a lot to actually listen to what people's needs are across different life stages. So one of the things that we have focused on is actually when we look in the data, about 20 years ago, we realized that we actually were not reflecting gender equality or gender balance in our management teams. And so it was about how do we really understand what the barriers are to reflecting that. And we started to identify that there was, one, of course, a lot that sat in terms of the mindset and bias across our different processes, whether that was recruitment, leadership development, succession, and so on. And today, we're actually very proud that when it comes to all of our managers globally, we have achieved 50-50 binary gender balance when it comes to manager level. 50% of our CEOs, and we're in 32 markets, 50% of our CEOs are women.
It's fantastic.
And also, and it's not just about the top number, it's then looking underneath when it comes to performance management and succession. And we realize that across the organization, both men and women are rated equally when it comes to performance and when it comes to potential assessments. And that is really important because for us it means that across the organization people have now sort of developed the competence on how they work with the topic of gender to be able to spot and mitigate the biases that actually come into the processes. So it's been really great to be able to identify those. Another, I think, important area for us is when it comes to gender equal pay, for example, and we have been onto this for so many years, and we're also very proud that we have closed the gap when it comes to gender equal pay across the organization.
Amazing.
And doing that very proactively. So on the topic of gender equality, I think it's really exciting to identify and then really work on removing some of the barriers that stand in the way.
It's fantastic to see your excitement, and one of the things that we wish is that we could take your excitement, we could take IKEA's progress and achievements and project that onto all companies in Europe. So I was just wondering, what do you think, what would you like to see other companies doing, or how can they be more like you?
Yeah. I think, first of all, to say that there are many organizations that are like us.
Okay.
We don't stand alone as an organization that's very in the front of this or proactive about what we do around gender equality. There are many organizations, but I think there is, of course, much more that needs to be done. I think one of the things that is very important when I think about our journey is around data, for example. We as an organization, we say all the time that what gets measured gets done. And we take very practical steps to really follow up and act on deviations. And so there is something about being able to access data and to be able to set very clear goals about what it is that we want to achieve. And so for us, it has been about binary gender balance.
Yep.
We have achieved that. We continue to follow that. But also, one of the things that is important to us is to really think about future generations. And we see that what gender looks like today is starting to change. And so we start to think about how is it that we need to think about the broad spectrum of gender equality when it comes to how we meet future generations. I think another important thing for us is around things like our policies and our guidelines. And I think it goes back to how do we remove the barriers in people's way. One of the things that we launched earlier this year was a new menopause guideline. And that was very exciting for me because that has been a topic that has been very close to my heart. And I know a lot of people will say, but you're a man, why is this important to you? But I have a sister, I have a mother, I have aunts who have gone through this, and I today now sit in a position where we have 170,000 co-workers, we have over 10,000 managers, of which at some point in their lives, they are going to experience this. So how do we remove the stigma? How do we get people comfortable talking about it? How do we provide the support that people actually need when they go through this life stage so that they're able to contribute fully to work? And it's been very exciting to actually see the response that we've gotten since we launched the new menopause guideline, especially for managers, because we have coupled it with training so that managers feel confident to actually discuss the topic in the workplace and know what type of support that they can offer co-workers when they are in that stage of their lives.
There's also implementing that progressive change as well. That sounds absolutely fantastic. So you've spoken about some of the things you're doing today and you've touched on the future, but I was wondering, what are the plans for the future?
Yeah. No, I think there are two main things just to highlight when it comes to the future. I think we, earlier this year, also started to work on a gender equality approach. And one of the things that stood out as part of that is we discovered, one, we need to start to look a bit more intersectionally when it comes to gender. Because, of course, a woman or a man is not just a woman and a man. They could have abilities or disabilities. They do have some ethnicity. They do have their sexual orientation. And when it comes to these identity aspects that we work on when it comes to the diversity and inclusion agenda, they are all intersected. And so how can we, for example, start to come up with solutions that not only particularly focus on removing barriers when it comes to gender, but remove barriers when it comes to the intersectionality? So we see that, for example, over the past 20 years, a lot of the work that we've done on gender equality has actually helped to break the glass ceiling for many women who are white. But we also see that in many of the countries where we operate, there's much more multicultural diversity, but we don't see that in our management teams. So we're now starting to think about what are the additional barriers, for example, that women with multiculturally diverse backgrounds actually face to get to management positions. And so that is part of the work that we now want to start to focus on. Another area is around care responsibilities, because we see today that the landscape of the care load is changing. And that is now changing not just because Because in previous years, it was about a woman would have kids and she has to take care of the kids and the family and so on. But we also now have a much more aging society when it comes to Europe, which means that more families may have people who have disabilities, who are less able, and that care load potentially, based on the current gender norms, will fall on women. And what does that then mean for all of the careers that they've been building? And so for us, there is something now that we're starting to look at when it comes to our co-workers as carers, and what type of support do we need to be partnering with others to provide, whether that is partnering with governments, with other corporates, civil society partners, to be able to create solutions that actually helps to address some of these emerging trends.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. And it links onto lots of the conversations we were having about intersectionality and gender equality yesterday. And someone said it's not an end goal. And I think that was very well demonstrated by your answer. I was wondering if anyone here in the room or online has any questions they would like to ask Books. Now is your chance, and we'll have flying mics going around for the people who are listening online. And online, you can submit your questions on Slido, and they will theoretically turn up on this iPad.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for this conversation. I was very curious to hear your perspective, so from a European company, because I know that in the US there has been a big backlash against D&I, and I know some companies like Harley Davidson, Walmart had to roll back their D&I practices and strategies because of this big backlash. So I was curious, what is your experience? What is happening in Europe? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think every day now we start to hear about different organizations dealing with the pressure that is coming from society around the diversity and inclusion topic. For us at IKEA, because we are values-led, because we are vision-driven, it continues to be part of our everyday. And now, increasingly, we start to identify what are those other areas that we can bring into our work so that across the organization, we have the muscle to be able to sort of deliver the right solutions that helps us to meet not just our co-worker needs, but also our customer needs. And so for us, we are doubling down, actually. And one of the reasons why we embrace this opportunity to come speak is because we know that this is part of our values and is part of our culture, but we need to actually be more visible to be a good example for other companies who are similar to us, to actually show that this is not just important as part of the moral case for building more progressive societies, but it's also important for us as businesses. Because ultimately, we want to reflect society in all of its diversity so that we can actually provide services that actually makes people's lives better. And that can only happen if we've got that diversity in our companies. So for us, we are taking the position where we need to be more proactive. We need to be more of a positive example to be able to show that. Across Europe, I also see that Europe is, I think, in a much more progressive place than what we see happening, for example, in North America. But we also notice that it really is about the narrative, isn't it? And so how can we secure that we are all collectively showing up and standing up for these important topics around diversity and inclusion? Because we have a responsibility to reflect everyone. That is our responsibility. And so how do we secure that we protect that?
Thank you so much. And I'm going to read out a question from the Slido. So someone said, the menopause guideline sounds incredible. Can you give some more examples of concrete measures IKEA has put in place to promote gender equality at work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. I think in addition to the menopause guidelines, I think one of the things that we found to be extremely important, for example, during COVID, was we discovered that, and I think this was general knowledge, that domestic violence cases, for example, increased during COVID time. And so for us, that was really important because if this was something that was happening in society, very clearly it was affecting our co-workers as well. And so it really was about thinking, what are the things that we need to do to actually address this? And so our first step was actually to provide training for our managers so that they can actually spot when this might be happening, but also provide support services for our coworkers. So how can we provide support for shelters, for example, if our coworkers needed it, or days off if they needed to take care of their families and their kids. So those were some of the measures that we put in place. But in addition to that, we also felt it was our responsibility to raise what is happening in society, because we are a life at home brand, and what happens in homes is important to us. And so for that reason, many of our countries then activated campaigns around domestic violence so that we can actually raise publicly what is happening in society, so that we can start a conversation and take actions to actually stop that from happening as much as we can. One example that we have, which is super exciting, was in Italy. So in Italy, the number for the helpline is 1522. And so what we did was we partnered with the government and some NGOs in Italy and introduced the number onto our price tags. So if you go into an IKEA store, on every single item, there would be this information sheet. And so we took out a section of it and we included the number 1522 so that anyone who came into an IKEA store or went to the bathroom or was looking at an item, we were able to raise awareness, not just for women, but also for men, that this is an important topic to us. And so those are just some of the other initiatives that we have got behind that helps us not just to secure and improve gender equality within our walls, but also contribute in society.
Fantastic. I'm happy to take another question from the audience, or if not, go on Slido. Could we have a mic to one of these? Oh, and could you just let us know your name, who you're from, and maybe keep the answers as tight as possible and see if you can maybe even fit in 2 questions.
Absolutely, I will do my best so that also we have the chance to take more than one question. My name is Julia, I'm a youth participant. Thank you so much and congratulations to you, to your work and to IKEA. It's brilliant to hear that you achieved full gender equality in management positions. So once again, congratulations, it's a big sign for society. I had a question around recruitment. So how do you ensure inclusive recruitment and how do you secure diverse talent in IKEA?
Really good question. I think 2 things just to raise quickly. One is around bias in recruitment. And so one of the things that we do is, of course, in addition to training our recruiters on how to mitigate bias in the recruitment process, it's also about how do we have diverse recruitment panels so that we can bring a lot more diversity into the selection process. And then another thing that we've actually done in recruitment is we no longer ask for salary history, because we realize that for many years, women have actually been negotiating lower salaries than men, which then, of course, impacts our gender equal pay. And so one of the ways to actually address that was to stop asking for salary history as part of recruitment so that we can actually address that in a very direct way.
That's a fantastic example. And I think hopefully if you've got time, within 60 seconds, we can ask the question and answer it. Over to you.
Yeah, very, very quick. So I'm Chris. I'm also a youth participant, and I recently entered the corporate world. And although I work in Sweden, so I noticed a lot of equality in the workspace. But one thing I did observe is I work in the marketing department, and I was the first man to enter the department, so it was women-dominated, women-led. But then when I was having conversations with the sales department or the IT, that was also very male-dominated. So then my question is, have you observed these kind of more hidden patterns on where each gender decides to lean into in the corporate world? Have you done something about that if you've observed? And what would you say is like your suggestions or recommendations for how companies should move forward when it comes to that?
And you can do that in 11 seconds.
I try my best. Brilliant question. The answer is yes. And we have such an amazing example from our digital So in digital today, we know that this is a function where it is much more male-dominated. And today, our management team globally for digital is gender-balanced. And that was a journey that took us about 10 to 12 years, but it goes back to my earlier point about what gets measured gets done. So we use the data to focus on it, and we put our energy behind it. And I think for many organizations, data on gender is something that we can all access. And so it's then about how do we use the data, address it with the mindset, and follow up. So that's really critical to be able to make the movements.
That's 2 minutes, but well done, both of you anyways. I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's here in the room. Thank you to those of you who've joined online, and thank you to those of you who have submitted questions, whether in person and online. And a huge thank you to you, Books, for coming and sharing your expertise. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you.